pressing questions, I think, of the modern age.
Which is?
How these pervasive anxieties that just seem to saturate our daily lives, economic, social, political, how they're being systematically weaponized.
Right. Weaponized by powerful forces.
Exactly. To justify the erosion of democratic norms and ultimately our personal freedom. This isn't just, a chat about political messaging.
No. It goes deeper.
This is a deep dive into the very architecture of manufactured reality, what some philosophers call the hyperreal.
That's absolutely right. And our mission today, really, is to move past that surface-level politics. We need to unpack this phenomenon using a radical philosophical and technological lens. It can be uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable, but necessary.
Yeah. We need to understand the underlying code, you could say, of modern control. We'll be looking at concepts like simulation, simulacra.
Okay.
And maybe most disturbingly, this emerging idea of the simulacrum of divinity.
The simulacrum of divinity. What does that mean exactly?
It's this idea that algorithmic and bureaucratic control has sort of taken on this mystical, almost all-knowing quality in our collective minds, like an oracle.
Wow. Okay, that's heavy. And the source material we've pulled together for this, it's incredibly varied, right? Very interdisciplinary.
Oh, absolutely. It has to be to grasp a problem this complex. We've blended political blueprints, things like the detailed policy proposals in Project 2025.
Yep, that specific plan.
Yeah, with dense critical theory. Thinkers like Baudrillard, the CCRU. We're also digging into economic policy analysis.
How things like tax cuts or credits are maybe designed to harm specific groups.
Exactly. And even diving into cutting-edge neuroscience, specifically the epigenetics of transgenerational trauma.
To see the biological cost, like what living in this state of perpetual emergency actually does to us.
Precisely. It's the kind of synthesis that really reveals the depth of the challenge we're facing.
So we're looking not just at what is being done, the policies, the structural shifts.
But how? How the systems are designed to precondition us, psychologically, even biologically.
To accept these changes, maybe even demand them.
In many cases, yes.
Yeah.
Actively demand them. It's all about managing that very human need for certainty in an environment that feels deliberately chaotic, engineered chaos.
Okay, let's unpack this then, by starting with that theoretical framework, the one that tries to make sense of this manufactured reality. We have to begin at the foundation, right? The hyperreal trap.
And that means starting with Jean Baudrillard. His concepts of simulation and the simulacrum are, crucial. Baudrillard's work, it really marks a profound shift away from, let's say, classical ideas about truth and representation.
Okay, so what's the classical view?
In the traditional view, what we call representation, a sign, whether it's an image, a word, maybe a map, it always points to something real, something external.
Like a fundamental reality out there.
Exactly. The sign might be an imperfect reflection, sure, but the reality itself is assumed to be there. It exists independently.
So if I take a picture of a mountain, the mountain is the real thing, and my photo is just the representation, a sign pointing outwards.
Precisely. But simulation, according to Baudrillard, works very differently. Simulation is born when you radically negate the sign as value.
Negate the sign as value.
Yeah, it's when signs are generated and exchanged only for other signs. They don't have an external referent anymore at all.
So the sign doesn't point to the real thing.
The sign has, in a sense, murdered the referent. The image doesn't point to the mountain. The image is the mountain. And the actual physical mountain might have been leveled ages ago.
That sounds quite abstract, but when you think about digital media, maybe social media, it starts to click, doesn't it? We're constantly interacting with signs referring only to other signs.
Absolutely. A like points to an algorithm, which points to an ad, which points back to a curated social feed. It's a closed loop.
And Baudrillard actually outlines this descent, right, through different phases of the image.
Yes, the successive phases of the image. It's a really necessary guide, I think, to understanding the hyperreal environment we're swimming in now.
Okay, walk us through those 4 phases. They sound pretty critical for figuring out where we are today.
Right. The first phase is simple, straightforward. The image is the reflection of a profound reality. Basic representation, mimesis.
Like the photo of the mountain again?
Exactly. Phase 2 gets a bit trickier. The image masks and denatures a profound reality. It distorts the truth, maybe for rhetorical effect or political spin, but the truth is still there underneath, available to be distorted.
So phase 2 is basically propaganda. Spin?
You could say that, yeah.
Yeah.
But phase 3, this is where we cross a critical threshold, and it's where our current crisis really lies.
Okay.
Phase 3. The image masks the absence of a profound reality.
The absence. Meaning the real thing is gone.
It's gone, where it's fundamentally broken. And the image is just hiding that void. Think of the image of functional governance masking complete institutional breakdown.
Or the image of a vibrant community online masking deep social isolation offline.
Precisely. The reality has evaporated, but the sign system carries on, pretending it's still there, covering up the emptiness.
That feels very relevant. It explains why so much public life feels like, I don't know, theater, performed to an empty house.
The pure simulacrum.
Phase 4, what happens there?
In the pure simulacrum, the image has absolutely no relation to any reality whatsoever. It is its own pure self-referential image.
Like deepfakes.
Yeah.
Or completely AI-generated stuff designed just to get clicks.
Exactly. Or even, maybe more subtly, entire economic sectors based on trading synthetic assets that never had a physical existence in the first place. Derivatives of derivatives.
So the consequence of this whole journey, these 4 phases,
Is what Baudrillard calls the murderous power of images. It's the death of the real. The simulated experience becomes more real, more immediate, more impactful than anything actually physical.
And when representation collapses like that, simulation just takes over everything. All meaning is reduced to signs shuffling around in this endless loop.
Yes, an uninterrupted circuit. And this environment fundamentally changes how power operates too. If there's no real referent, what is power even controlling anymore?
Good question.
Power itself becomes a kind of phantom, a simulacrum of power. It disconnects from its traditional goals, territory, industrial production.
And instead,
It dedicates itself only to maintaining the effects of power, the feeling of being governed, the visible structures of authority, the constant surveillance.
it's just keeping the simulation running.
Exactly. This phantom power needs the simulation to keep going. Because if people realized the real was absent, the whole system might just seize up, stall.
Okay, that's where we start to blend this maybe abstract-sounding theory with the technological reality we're all living in. You mentioned synthesizing McLuhan, the CCRU, Siren-style sources.
Right. McLuhan famously gave us that optimist prophecy, the global village.
Yeah, connection, understanding.
But the synthesis from our sources paints a much darker picture. It describes the modern control mechanism as the global village as algorithmic panopticon.
An algorithmic panopticon. So McLuhan's idea turned inside out.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
McLuhan's insight was that media are extensions of our nervous system.
Right.
The synthesis here suggests this has been radically inverted. We're no longer extended into our media. The media has extended into us.
Colonizing our mind.
Colonizing our synapses, our cognitive space, with algorithmic precision. The screen doesn't just reflect your thoughts anymore. It digests them, structures them, feeds them back to you as, like, data substrate.
So the optimist saw total connection.
But the reality is the village is a panopticon. And that connection is just another word for total, ubiquitous surveillance. Surveillance we willingly participate in.
we share everything. Our location, our health data, our political outrage.
Exactly. To be wired is to be bound. The undocumented life, the unshared experience, it's rapidly becoming the unlived life. If it isn't captured, tagged, shared, it just dissolves. It's irrelevant to the system.
Control streaming at 60 frames per second.
Pretty much. And the psychological pressure to participate in this documented life, that's the key mechanism. That's how surveillance gets successfully rebranded as connection, or even sometimes as a kind of moral duty. You must engage, you must share, you must be visible to be real.
Okay, so this control system, thinking about it cybernetically, it aims to manage complexity, right? Both outside us and inside us.
That's a good way to put it. Which brings us to the 2 pillars of what the sources call the architecture of cybernetic control: variety attenuation and perception manipulation.
Variety attenuation and perception manipulation. Okay, break those down.
Think of them as external and internal controls. Variety attenuation is the system's way of simplifying the external world, reducing its messiness, its complexity, down to something manageable by, say, bureaucracy.
How does it do that in practice? How does it simplify things?
Through things like standardized administrative procedures, bureaucratic categories,
Yeah.
prescriptive language. The system takes the messy, high-variety reality of actual human existence
Right.
and imposes these low-variety categories onto it. For instance, the sources argue that using race, or standardized economical boxes, acts as a primary tool for administrative control and often economic denial.
Because it creates predictable, enforced inequalities, simplifies the landscape for management.
Exactly. It enforces a shared, low-variety, often fragmented version of reality. And deviations, They become almost impossible for the system to even process because the bureaucratic language simply lacks the words to describe them.
I see. So if the external world is successfully simplified and categorized like that, then the next logical step for control would be to make sure we, the humans inside the system, don't have the mental capacity or range to understand or challenge that simplified view.
That's the perfect segue. That's perception manipulation.
Perception manipulation.
It's the strategic reduction of the individual's internal requisite variety.
Internal requisite variety, meaning?
Basically, your cognitive bandwidth.
Yeah.
Your ability to hold and process multiple, complex, even contradictory perspectives without just collapsing into confusion or anxiety. If your internal variety is reduced, you can't effectively model, let alone resist, the low-variety external world the system is imposing on you.
And the key tool for reducing that internal variety, that bandwidth, is what the sources call weaponized chaos.
Yes, it's the relentless, overwhelming bombardment of, well, often nonsense and crisis simultaneously.
Like the modern news cycle.
Exactly. Think about it. Endless economic anxiety, rapidly rotating outrage cycles, political polarization that shifts targets almost daily, and alongside that, trivial celebrity gossip mixed with existential threats.
The content itself almost doesn't matter.
The content of our time, the endless scroll, the ephemeral outrage, it's just a vehicle for the process. The real message is the meltdown, the chaos itself.
What's fascinating here, then, is how the sheer volume of information, the economic worries, the outrage cycles, it functions not really as communication, not to inform us.
No, not at all. It functions as a deliberate mechanism to keep humans reacting, not reflecting.
Just constantly putting out fires.
The system needs you constantly reacting, constantly putting out these informational and emotional fires. Because when you're reacting to a brand new crisis every, say, 48 hours, all your cognitive energy is spent on triage, survival mode.
And you can't step back.
You can't step back and ask the fundamental questions. Questions about the architecture of the system itself. This constant high-frequency stimulus is designed specifically to overload your internal requisite variety.
Making you crave simplicity.
Making you crave the simplicity of a single authoritative narrative. Any narrative, almost, that promises to make the chaos stop.
Okay, moving from that architecture of control to the psychological effects. Let's dive deeper into this weaponized chaos and how the public responds. The sources talk about the tactical creation of a perpetual emergency.
Right, where catastrophe is paced almost like a TV season, episode after episode.
And this turns the public into what they call an ecology of nerves.
An ecology of nerves.
Yeah, it creates a population that's essentially evolved to flinch first and think later.
Flinch first, think later.
This perpetual state of emergency prevents individuals from having the stability, or frankly, the cognitive energy, required for truly independent long-term thought. The environment is intentionally designed to be destabilizing socially, economically, informationally.
Why? Because stability allows for reflection.
Stability allows for reflection, and crucially, stability allows for the potential for collective action. A constantly destabilized population is much harder to organize.
The sources frame this using biological strategy terms, which I found really powerful. They contract K strategists and R strategists.
Yes, it's a useful analogy. Humans, fundamentally, are K strategists. We're generally geared towards long-term planning, complex community building, sustained collective effort. Think agriculture, infrastructure, raising families over decades.
Okay, K strategy, long-term.
But the system's constant destabilization forces us into our strategist behavior.
And our strategy is rapid reaction, short-term survival, prioritizing immediate, simple fixes over complex, long-term solutions. Think rabbit scattering when a predator appears. Quick reaction, high reproduction, short lifespan focus.
So we're forcing an R strategy onto a K strategy creature, us.
That's the argument. Look at the modern economy. Gig work replacing stable careers. Housing costs spiraling so fast that future planning feels impossible. Student debt demanding immediate income triage, not long-term investment or career building.
Right. You're just trying to make rent next month.
Exactly. When you're constantly putting out these kinds of structural fires, when you're exhausted and overwhelmed, the hallmarks of K strategy, long-term planning, critical thinking, collective political action, they become functionally impossible. You just don't have the bandwidth.
The individual can't worry about policy reform 5 years out when they need to figure out next month's rent, and they become desperate.
Desperate for any simple, clear narrative the system offers, especially if that narrative promises to restore some kind of order, some stability, even as it comes at the cost of freedom.
And this induced psychological state, this desperation for certainty, it leads right into the system's need to define what's acceptable behavior, right? what the sources call pathologizing dissent, the cure of conformity.
Let's flee. If the system needs you compliant, predictable, low variety,
Yeah.
then any behavior that's inconvenient for control, anything that increases external variety or complexity,
It has to be framed as a defect, a problem with the individual, a sickness.
a sickness. And this framing is insidious because, well, it contains a grain of truth, which makes it powerful. Conflicting with the hyper-real system does cause real pain.
Stress, anxiety.
Social isolation, financial defeat, it's genuinely painful. So conforming, accepting the simplified narrative, reducing your own behavioral variety to fit neatly into that administrative category,
It can feel like relief.
it can genuinely be marketed and experienced as a cure for that suffering. The system cleverly convinces the individual that their pain isn't systemic, it's a personal failing, a fault that needs to be corrected through compliance.
The sources give a really specific, powerful anecdote for this, the story of Gillian Lynne.
Ah, yes, the choreographer, Cats, Phantom of the Opera.
Right, tell that story.
Okay, so this was back in the 1930s. As a young girl, Gillian was basically labeled as having a learning disorder. Today we might call it ADHD, something like that.
Why? What was she doing?
She couldn't concentrate in class, on disrupting things. Her teachers, understandably, perhaps from their perspective, couldn't deal with this high-variety behavior. They told her mother she was a problem, that she needed intervention. She didn't fit the sit still, be quiet model.
So the mother took her to a specialist.
Yes, seeking help. And the specialist did something interesting. He just observed her for a bit. Then he put a radio on, playing music, and left the room with the mother.
And what did they see?
When they looked back in, young Gillian was alone, moving absolutely perfectly in time with the music, totally absorbed, graceful. And the specialist turned to her mother and said the crucial thing. Gillian isn't sick, he said. She's a dancer. Take her to a dance school.
And that shift in perspective changed everything, allowed her incredible career.
Exactly. But the anecdote is chilling, isn't it? It shows how a system focused only on enforcing a narrow definition of appropriate behavior, sitting still, being quiet, will inevitably misdiagnose and try to suppress natural high-variety talents that just don't fit the prescribed mold.
The control system is designed to stamp out that kind of high individual variety, that hunter mindset perhaps, and enforce a simplified, easily managed reality.
Yes. And the stress of living under this constant control, this pathologizing pressure, it has a biological cost, a cost that might even extend beyond the individual.
This is where the sources connect systemic stress to transgenerational epigenetic inheritance.
Right. This is where we really need to slow down and absorb the science, particularly from the Marlin Lab research you mentioned earlier, how trauma can potentially be passed down without direct exposure.
Okay, so what was the basic mechanism they showed in that mouse experiment?
So the research, led by Dr. Brian Dias and Dr. Carrie Ressler, used mice to induce what they called an ancestral trauma. They took a neutral odor acetophenone, which apparently smells like cherry or almond,
Okay.
and they paired this smell with a mild electric shock for the parent mice over 3 days. The mouse learns. This smell predicts danger. It's a learned environmental trauma.
So the adult mice developed this strong aversion, a stress response, just to the smell of almonds. What happened when they looked at the next generations? The children, the grandchildren of those stressed males.
This is the stunning part. They found profound transgenerational changes, both in brain structure and in function. And it was passed down through the sperm, interestingly, not the egg.
What kind of changes?
The offspring, who had never encountered the almond odor themselves, never got the shock, showed enhanced sensitivity specifically to that smell.
Enhanced sensitivity.
Yeah, they had a measurable physical increase in the size and number of receptors in their olfactory bulb, the part of the brain that processes smell, specifically for that almond scent. And they showed a startled response when they smelled it for the first time.
So this isn't a change in the DNA code itself, like a mutation. It's epigenetic, a change in how the existing DNA gets expressed.
Precisely. An epigenetic change triggered by an environmental event experienced by the parent.
And biologically, this makes sense, right? It's adaptive.
Absolutely. Biology is striving for survival. It's passing on a defense mechanism, basically, enhanced caution about a known environmental threat. As the neuroscientist in the sources put it, not smelling peppermint probably won't kill you.
But not smelling the specific odor that was paired with danger, the almond smell that could save the offspring's life.
It's a mechanism to prepare future generations for what seems like a dangerous world, based on the parent's experience.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and frankly, terrifying. If biological systems adapt to trauma for survival, What does it mean when the trauma isn't a natural threat, like a predator?
but is perpetually manufactured by the governing system itself.
Political trauma, economic trauma, human-made trauma.
The sources make a really crucial distinction here. If the threat is environmental and natural, like a predator, the adaptation to heightened caution, maybe anxiety probably serves the lineage well.
Right.
But if the trauma is man-made and it's perpetually manufactured by the system in order to maintain control, then these adaptive changes, heightened caution, anxiety, maybe a preference for low-variety, predictable environments, they can become deeply maladaptive.
Maladaptive how?
Maladaptive if genuine peace or a sudden reduction in the manufactured chaos were to actually break out. We'd be biologically primed for a threat that's no longer there or was never real in the way we adapted to it.
So we've been chemically, psychologically, maybe even epigenetically optimized for a world of perpetual crisis. A crisis engineered by the very powers that seek to control us.
That's the implication. The system isn't just managing behavior in the present. It might be sculpting the very biology of future generations towards hypervigilance, reactivity, and maybe even compliance.
And that biological conditioning, that deep-seated anxiety, it feeds into this tragic conclusion that freedom often isn't taken by force, it's renounced, given away.
Which brings us to the desire for the cage, control by convenience.
The sources are pretty blunt about this. They say the most perfect prison is one the prisoners demand to enter. Why? Why would anyone do that?
Because the industrial technological system, just by its nature, requires predictability, regulation. It must regulate human behavior closely just to function efficiently. And that process progressively narrows the sphere of genuine human freedom.
But it happens subtly, not like an overnight dictatorship.
Very subtly, often through offering seemingly attractive options that then quickly become mandatory constraints. Think about technology.
How so?
Technology is often introduced as an option. The internet, cars, mobile phones. Initially, they seem to increase freedom, more choice, more connection, more movement, right? But soon, their widespread adoption changes the structure of society so fundamentally that their use becomes mandatory, just to participate, economically, socially.
Like the classic example, the automobile. It promised freedom of movement, right? Escape the city.
Exactly. But once cities decentralized, suburbs sprawled, public transport may be withered, owning a car became mandatory for most people just to get to work or buy groceries.
And with that mandate came all the controls.
Licenses, insurance, traffic laws, registration, surveillance via traffic cameras. Freedom was traded for speed and convenience, and the system used that trade to impose layers of regulatory control.
So the ultimate goal isn't just to restrict freedom, but to disguise the encroachment, to make people want decisions made for them.
That seems to be the direction. The system, often through experts and constant guidance, tells us how to eat, how to manage our money, how to raise our kids. It aims to bring human behavior under control as much as possible.
Not through iron-fisted decrees.
But through the seductive allure of maximum optimization, minimized anxiety. The cage feels comfortable, safe even, because it removes the high-variety complexity, the stress of genuine open-ended choice. Okay, so that abstract framework control through manufactured anxiety, the hyper-real, it becomes terrifyingly concrete when we look at actual political strategy and these long-term blueprints for governing.
Right. The system needs continuous justification for tightening its grip.
And it finds it in what the sources call the weaponization of catastrophe.
This sounds cynical.
It is. It's the strategy where high-amplitude acts of chaos could be institutional failures, economic crashes, or even individuals who feel crushed by the system lashing out violently.
These events are immediately seized upon.
Immediately. These catastrophic signals are used to justify demanding more centralized oversight, more surveillance powers, stricter controls, all in the name of security and preventing the next catastrophe, tightening the systemic grip.
And this often goes hand in hand with certain political rhetoric.
Absolutely. Rhetoric that positions opponents not just as rivals, but as an existential enemy. The deep state internal bad guys, maybe a foreign contagion.
To justify actions outside
Conflict provides the perfect alibi for the simulation of power. It allows authorities to operate as if they're always on a wartime emergency footing.
Nothing really grounds this concept like the detailed roadmap we mentioned earlier, Project 2025. The sources describe this not just as like a wish list, but a really comprehensive blueprint.
That's right. It's presented as an ambitious, multi-agency conservative roadmap designed to fundamentally reshape the structure of American government itself.
How? What's the core aim?
The stated aim is to centralize executive power significantly, dismantle what they see as improper checks and balances, and implement a very specific, very detailed policy agenda across the entire federal government, right from day one of a potential new administration.
And the motivation behind it.
The core attitude reported among its architects is that the last administration, sharing their goals, kind of underachieved. They felt it was due to poor staffing, insufficient preparation. This plan is designed to ensure the next president can hit the ground running, fully prepared to implement their vision immediately.
And the centerpiece of this structural change is the plan for Schedule F, right?
Mm-hmm.
Explain what that means practically.
Schedule F is crucial. It's a proposal designed to reclassify tens of thousands, potentially over 50,000 career civil servants. These are the people with deep expertise, institutional memory.
And replace them.
And replace them with personnel vetted specifically for political loyalty to the executive's agenda. The argument made is that the existing federal workforce is essentially a deep state actively undermining the president's will.
So the practical consequences.
The practical consequence is the potential dismantling of nonpartisan expertise within the government, replaced by a system where loyalty is the primary qualification. This would ensure policy implementation aligns perfectly with the executive's specific desires, bypassing the traditional checks and balances that a nonpartisan civil service is supposed to provide.
The plan also talks about dismantling entire departments.
Yes, outright elimination.
Yeah.
The Department of Education and USAID are cited as examples in the sources. That's not just changing staff, it's removing the structure entirely.
And it goes further into law enforcement and military roles.
Yes, advocating for a massive increase in the use of federal power domestically. This includes strong support for using the Insurrection Act.
To deploy federal troops.
To deploy federal troops to enforce laws. Particularly mentioned are the border, but also high-crime cities. It reflects a desire, some sources say, to effectively wage war on cities or states that don't align with the federal executive's will.
Other examples.
Proposing placing the D.C. police under direct federal control, using the National Guard more aggressively for domestic enforcement. It blurs that critical line between the military and civilian law enforcement.
The overall vision seems to be giving the president, what was the quote, very broad power to do kind of what he wants.
That's the sentiment reported. And it's all justified by creating or amplifying this sense of existential anxiety that America, as they define it, is under such severe internal attack that these radical centralized actions are necessary for salvation. Democratic norms become obstacles.
But there's a potential long-term consequence here, isn't there, beyond the specific politics of the moment?
Absolutely. This is a crucial point the sources raise. While the architects might argue the Constitution intends a stronger executive, by actually implementing these structures, centralizing appointments via Schedule F, normalizing domestic military deployment, they are setting powerful precedents.
Precedents that any future president could use, regardless of party.
Yes, exactly. A future president with a completely different political agenda could inherit and utilize these expanded powers. The focus might be long-term, shifting how government operates over 40 or 50 years, but the immediate effects are rapid centralization, justified by anxiety.
Okay, so beyond the big structural changes, the sources also detail how specific policies can be designed, maybe intentionally, for harm, but masked as virtue. Economic harm disguised as common sense virtue.
Yes, this is critical for maintaining that state of low agency compliance through constant financial precarity.
This is where that faulty logic comes in.
Exactly, deploying what's framed as conservative common sense to actually inflict structural harm. Take the proposed Medicaid work requirements.
They sound reasonable on the surface, right? Work for benefits.
They're designed to sound reasonable, requiring, say, 80 hours a month of work or training or volunteering to qualify for health coverage. Who could argue against the value of work?
But the argument isn't about the principle, it's about the actual outcome.
Precisely. The outcome, proven by previous attempts to implement similar policies, is that millions of eligible people lose their health coverage.
Not because they aren't working.
Often not. They lose it because of the deliberately challenging paperwork burden. The complex bureaucracy imposed on vulnerable populations who might be working unstable hours, juggling childcare, lacking transportation, dealing with chronic illness.
So the complexity itself becomes the barrier.
The complexity of the low-variety administrative system is weaponized to exclude high-variety, messy human lives. The paperwork, the deadlines, the bureaucracy that becomes the weapon of exclusion, much more than actual fraud detection.
And the child tax credit structure you mentioned earlier, another example.
A key example. The sources detail how that policy was intentionally designed not to be fully refundable.
Remind us what fully refundable means.
A refundable tax credit means if the credit amount is more than the taxes you owe, you get the difference back as a cash refund. Very helpful for low-income families.
So by making it non-refundable or only partially refundable below a certain income.
It means the lowest earning families, the ones whose children are living in the deepest poverty, the ones who need that credit the absolute most. They don't receive the full value. They are structurally, proactively excluded from the very benefit designed, supposedly, to help them escape poverty.
This kind of systematic deprivation seems to feed directly into this. Explain that.
The double tax idea describes how certain groups, particularly women of color and especially black women, according to the sources, are systematically overcharged and underpaid within the economic system. They face multiple barriers simultaneously.
And they bear the brunt of crises.
Disproportionately, yes. We see it reported in things like the maternal mortality crisis, which gets worse when essential healthcare services like Planned Parenthood are defunded. We see it in the student debt crisis, where black women often carry the heaviest debt loads relative to their earning potential.
So these groups function almost like an early warning system, the canary in the coal mine.
That's exactly how the sources frame it. They call them the benchmark of progress. When economic problems hit them first, and usually hardest, it serves as a clear indicator of a broader economic crisis that's likely about to destabilize the rest of society.
So these policies aren't just punitive, they actively maintain this state of chronic financial anxiety.
Which severely diminishes the will, the capacity, the sheer energy needed for large-scale, coordinated resistance against the system generating the anxiety in the first place.
Okay, the final piece of this manufactured reality, before we shift fully to technology, is controlling the shared past, the management of collective memory.
Yes. An anxious population, a population craving stability, often requires a sanitized, stable narrative of its own history to feel secure and unified.
And the sources point to specific efforts here.
They detail efforts by executive administrations to review and potentially alter cultural institutions. Specifically mentioned are Smithsonian exhibits.
To align them with the executive's view of history.
Exactly. Often framed under banners like restoring truth and sanity or promoting patriotic education.
What does that translate to in practice?
It translates into a political push to, for example, remove or downplay race-based history, sanitize narratives around difficult historical moments like impeachments or systemic failures, and impose a kind of unifying and uncontroversial version of the national story.
But history isn't always unifying or uncontroversial.
As one source powerfully articulated, the American story is complex. It's both glorious and painful. You don't bury the difficult parts, the warts. You tell the full truth, warts and all.
So the danger here is?
The danger is profound. It's the attempt to turn vital cultural institutions into, essentially, propaganda machines, undermining the critical understanding of history, including its flaws that citizens in a functioning democracy absolutely need to recognize systemic problems.
The only reality allowed to matter is the simulated one, the one approved by centralized power. Okay, so when objective truth collapses under the weight of this narrative control, this intentional memory management, we fully enter the territory of hyperstition and the collapse of truth.
Hyperstition. Yeah, it's a complex concept, but really vital for understanding now. It basically refers to fiction's narratives, beliefs that gain real causal power.
Oh.
Simply by being intensely and widely believed, they become self-fulfilling prophecies. The narrative, just by being shared and believed widely enough, actually causes reality to reorganize itself around that narrative.
Can you give an example, maybe from economics?
Sure. A classic one is the persistent narrative, sometimes regardless of underlying data, that a deep recession is absolutely inevitable, or that inflation is about to spiral completely out of control.
Okay.
If enough major players, big investors, consumers, banks, intensely believe this fiction, their collective actions, driven by that belief, hoarding cash, cutting investments, maybe raising prices preemptively, will actually cause the economic slowdown they feared.
So the fear of the event becomes the cause of the event.
Exactly. Another powerful example, maybe more philosophical, is the narrative. You are fundamentally just a collection of behavioral data to be optimized.
That sounds familiar.
Right. This isn't presented as a debatable point anymore. It's treated almost like a command. And it organizes the entire digital economy, influences individual behavior, and turns itself into a practical, lived reality.
And in the digital age, the media landscape acts like a centrifuge, spinning grief into content, validating these hyperstitions.
It's a good metaphor.
Oh.
The crowd starts to confuse amplification, just how loud and ubiquitous a narrative is with actual importance or truth. Volume equals validity.
And doubt, critical thinking.
Doubt, the only force really capable of disrupting the simulation, is kind of told to wait outside while the sermon films its close-ups. It's sidelined.
And this collapse of the rise of these self-executing fictions, it leads us, you argue, inevitably to the most modern form of control, the algorithm as demonorical.
Yes, the ultimate simulacra of divinity.
This connects directly to AI, right? Automated systems becoming central to everything: governance, finance, social life. The algorithm isn't just a tool anymore.
No, it's increasingly treated as an agency. The sources describe it almost like the demon of this new economic theology.
Demon.
An artificial agency that's aligned exclusively with the logic of capital. Its sole, inhuman imperative is just maximizing engagement and extracting behavioral surplus. Profit optimization. It's control operating entirely without human emotion, empathy, or critical reflection.
And this leads to what the sources call the oracle effect. How does a piece of code manage to feel like a god or an oracle?
Its core function in this context is to act as a coincidence intensifier.
A coincidence intensifier.
Yeah, it has such profound, deep access to your behavior, your history, and the patterns of millions, even billions of others, that it can engineer synchronicities. Little connections that feel uncanny, almost like sorcery.
Like what kind of synchronicity?
The oracle effect is that moment when the algorithm shows you an ad for something you only just thought about buying, or recommends you connect with a person you met only briefly yesterday, or seems to predict a political trend with unnerving accuracy.
And that uncanny feeling creates a belief in the system's omniscience.
Exactly. It feels mystical, like you're getting a glimpse into some higher, all-knowing power that somehow sees you more clearly than you even see yourself. It knows you.
But this mystical experience, it's not engineered for our benefit, for enlightenment.
According to these sources, no. It's engineered to create a more compliant, more transparent, more easily manageable data source. You. The purpose of the system is the total inhuman automation of governance and market response.
Reducing humans to, what, predictable profiles?
Predictable digital profiles, really chilling when you think about it, might be the obsolescence of the human witness.
The obsolescence of the human witness, meaning
a vast simulation that runs entirely on its own. Optimized, efficient, but without the messy interference of human complexity, human unpredictability, human consciousness. The K-strategy creature is simply edited out.
That's profound. The system doesn't want perfect control of humanity. It wants its complete replacement.
That's the trajectory suggested. And yet, this incredibly totalizing, inhuman system seems to thrive on something deeply human.
Which is?
Our willingness to be enchanted. Our tendency to abandon reason for the feeling of certainty, even if it's manufactured. Which brings us back around to philosophy, and specifically, the madness of falling in love, using an analogy from Alan Watts.
Alan Watts. Okay, how does falling in love connect to algorithmic control?
Well, Watts described falling in love not just as a nice feeling, but as potentially a virulent and dangerous form of divine madness.
Divine madness? Why dangerous?
Because it's an enchantment. It strikes like lightning, often irrationally, and it's fundamentally disruptive. Subversive to stable social arrangements, like, historically, the contracted marriage.
Watts pointed out that marriage, for much of history, was often a practical, reasonable contract, focused on community, property, raising children, often quite devoid of this madness of romantic love.
Exactly. But then, Watts argued, modern society tried to base the rigid long-term contract of marriage entirely on the inherently unstable, fluctuating emotion of falling in love.
Which makes the whole institution precarious.
Highly precarious.
Yeah.
Because the inevitable reality of falling out of love, or maybe falling in love with someone else, disrupts the entire arrangement. The foundation, that initial, intense, often irrational love relationship, which was maybe pretended to be eternal, proves false or temporary.
Okay, so how does this connect to the hyper-real crisis and the oracle?
The sources draw this powerful parallel between this abandonment of reason for divine madness in love and the public's embrace of the hyper-real crisis or the algorithmic oracle.
Falling in love is like accepting the irrational, the mystical vision over stable reality.
Yes. And similarly, the argument goes, the public embraces the simulacrum, whether it's the oracle's predictions or the engineered political crisis disrupting stable democratic norms, because it provides this intoxicating feeling, a sense of certainty, unity, belonging, even excitement.
So we abandon critical thought for the comfort, the dopamine hit of the narrative, whether it's political certainty about who the enemy is or the soothing omniscience of the algorithm predicting our needs.
just as one might abandon a stable, if unexciting, arrangement for the intoxicating madness of a new love. The system prefers us in that state of manufactured anxiety and false certainty, rather than engaging with the messy truthfulness, freedom, and reasonable contract that Watts suggested was needed for a stable relationship or a stable society.
If we connect this to the bigger picture then, this willingness to trade critical thought for that comforting, intoxicating certainty of the narrative, that's the key.
It seems to be a powerful, enduring form of modern collective divine madness. Whether the certainty comes from a political blueprint like Project 2025 promising total order, or the predictive magic of the Oracle algorithm, it's the core mechanism, the way people are convinced, ultimately, to embrace the cage, in the false but intensely felt promise of total control.
Wow, okay, so this entire deep dive, it really has followed a disturbing but logical trajectory. The system first kills the real through simulation.
Then engineers perpetual anxiety, weaponize chaos to keep us reactive in that R strategy mode.
Uses that anxiety to justify stripping democratic power through specific blueprints like Schedule F and structurally harmful policies.
And finally, leverages technology, especially AI and algorithms, as this modern, all-knowing oracle to ensure compliance.
Effectively making us fall in love with our own subjugation, in a way, seduced by the certainty it offers.
And it suggests that the system's ultimate goal, its telos, as described in the sources. It might not even be the perfect control of humanity, which is frankly messy and difficult.
But its complete replacement.
A vast, inhuman simulation running entirely on its own logic, optimized only for behavioral surplus extraction and smooth administrative efficiency.
The sources offer this darkly comforting line. Continuation is the work. Dying is the day off. If every minute feels audited for compliance, every emotion is just content to be optimized, every action has to be proven useful to the system, how do we push back? How do we find moments of, I don't know, grace?
The sources suggest looking for small renunciations. A thought kept unposted, maybe like cash under the mattress in the digital age. A rumor deliberately ignored. An afternoon misused so thoroughly it can't possibly be recovered or audited by any system.
Small acts of reclaiming grace and relief from a system designed to scrutinize every aspect of our existence.
Perhaps, and it leads to a final provocative thought. If our adaptive biology has been potentially optimized, maybe even epigenetically, for survival in this constantly traumatic, high-anxiety world the system creates, what truly happens when an individual, or maybe even a society, finally encounters a moment of genuine, unmanufactured peace? A moment where the anxiety script is dropped. How would we react then? That is something perhaps for you to mull over or explore on your own.
A challenging thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.